Your work is a catastrophic failure and a massive waste of company resources. My supervisor announced, her manicured finger hovering over the delete key. I watched 14 months of grueling labor vanish from the server in a single click, while my colleagues gasped in horror. I did not shed a single tear. Instead, I calmly answered my ringing phone, put it on speaker, and accepted a $1 million signing bonus from our biggest rival. Her smug smile vanished instantly. My name is Clara, and I am 33 years old. Until that fateful Tuesday morning, I worked as a senior risk data strategist at Vanguard Financial. Before I share the details of how I turned the ultimate corporate betrayal into the most satisfying revenge, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had a toxic boss try to destroy your hard work. The air inside the glass-walled conference room on the 40th floor of Vanguard Financial was stifling. It was thick with the kind of corporate terror that my supervisor Sylvia had cultivated over her 5-year reign as Vice President of Risk Assessment. At 45 years old, Sylvia was a relic of the old corporate guard. She survived not by innovating, but by using aggressive buzzwords and shamelessly stealing credit for the labor of anyone stationed beneath her. I sat perfectly still in my ergonomic leather chair, with my hands neatly folded over my legal pad. Around the long mahogany table, 6 junior analysts stared down at their laps, absolutely terrified to make eye contact with either of us. On the massive projector screen behind Sylvia, the complex lines of code I had spent the last 14 months writing glowed in crisp neon green. It was a predictive risk algorithm. I had designed a self-learning model to anticipate volatile shifts in international real estate markets, specifically aimed at preventing the kind of catastrophic financial losses that could sink an entire firm. I had sacrificed my weekends, my evenings, and my sanity to build it. I had worked 60-hour weeks, fueling my body on nothing but stale coffee and pure ambition, while Sylvia left the office at 3 in the afternoon every single day for her networking golf sessions. I asked for a streamlined risk metric. Sylvia sneered, stepping closer to the projector screen. She tapped her manicured fingernail against the glass, the sound sharp and grating. You have given me a convoluted, over-engineered mess. The board presentation is on Monday. Do you honestly think I am going to stand in front of the chief executive officer and present this high school science project? The algorithm is fully functional, I said, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. It successfully back-tested against the 2008 housing crash with a 99% predictive accuracy rate. It will save our clients hundreds of millions of dollars in blind investments. It is bloated, she snapped, her face flushing an angry mottled red. It is bloated, it is arrogant, and I will not have my name attached to it. I knew exactly why she did not want her name attached to it. She did not understand how it worked. My algorithm threatened her because it exposed her complete lack of technical knowledge. She wanted simple pie charts and colorful graphs that she could point to, not a sophisticated machine learning environment that she could not explain to the board. If you would like, I can simplify the user interface for your presentation, I offered calmly. No, Sylvia said. A cruel and triumphant smile spread across her lips. She walked over to the presentation laptop plugged into the podium. We are not revising this. We are starting over from scratch. The presentation is in 3 days, I reminded her. There is no time to rebuild the model. Then you had better brew some strong coffee, Clara, she replied. Before I could fully process what she was doing, Sylvia began typing aggressively on the keyboard. She opened the core directory. She highlighted the master folder containing the entire sandbox environment. The sandbox was the highly secure and isolated server space where the algorithm lived, specifically designed to keep our most sensitive projects away from the main network until they were ready for deployment. Sylvia, wait, one of the junior analysts gasped, breaking his terrified silence. That is the only uncompiled master file. I am the vice president of this department, Sylvia snapped at the young man. I decide what is retained and what is discarded. She did not just hit the delete key. She entered her executive administrative credentials. She bypassed the standard corporate trash bin entirely and executed a permanent server wipe. A small loading bar appeared on the projector screen, zipping from 0 to 100% in less than 3 seconds. A prompt flashed on the screen, confirming that the files had been permanently deleted. The room went deathly silent. The junior analysts looked at me with wide and horrified eyes. They expected me to scream. They expected me to burst into tears. They expected the total psychological collapse of a woman who had just watched over a year of her life evaporate into the digital ether. I did not cry. Instead, a strange and profound sense of peace washed over me. Sylvia did not know the law. She did not know that under corporate labor regulations, the intentional and malicious destruction of an employee's work without proper data retention protocols was a severe corporate liability. But more importantly, she did not know the massive secret I had been guarding for the last 8 months. I had never actually coded the core logic on Vanguard servers. There, Sylvia said, dusting her hands together as if she had just taken out the actual trash. Now I expect a functional and simplified model on my desk by 8 on Monday morning. If you fail to deliver, you will be terminated for insubordination. Do we understand each other? I looked at the empty projector screen. Then I looked directly into her eyes. Perfectly. The suffocating silence in the boardroom was suddenly shattered by a sharp and melodic ringing. It was my personal cell phone vibrating against the polished mahogany table. "Turn that off," Sylvia hissed angrily. "We are in a meeting." I looked down at the caller identification. The name flashing on the bright screen made my pulse accelerate, but I kept my breathing perfectly even. It was Thomas Caldwell. He was the chief executive officer of Apex Financial, which happened to be Vanguard's largest and most aggressive industry rival. I did not decline the call. I did not silence the phone. I reached out, swiped the green icon, and pressed the speakerphone button for the entire room to hear. Clara, a deep and authoritative male voice, echoed through the boardroom crystal clear over the phone speaker. "I apologize for calling during business hours, but we have finished reviewing the encrypted sample you sent over. My lead engineers are absolutely speechless." Sylvia froze. The color instantly drained from her face, leaving her looking sickly and pale. "Clara, hang up that phone right now," Sylvia whispered furiously, glancing nervously at the junior analysts who were now hanging on every word. I ignored her completely. "I am glad to hear that, Thomas," I said, my voice projecting loud and clear across the silent room. "Have you reached a decision?" "We have," Thomas replied immediately. "The board has authorized me to meet your terms in full. We are offering you the Senior Director of Quantitative Risk position effective immediately. And as for your algorithm, we are prepared to offer you a $1 million signing bonus to bring the intellectual property exclusively to Apex." A collective gasp swept through the junior analysts. One of them actually dropped his pen, the clatter sounding like a gunshot in the quiet room. Sylvia opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She stared at the phone on the table as if it were a live explosive device. She realized exactly what was happening, but her brain could not process the magnitude of her own mistake. "I accept," I said into the phone, maintaining absolute eye contact with Sylvia as her world began to crumble. "I will be sending over my signed contract within the hour." "Outstanding," Thomas said cheerfully. "Welcome to the team, Clara. We will see you on Monday." I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. I calmly reached over, closed my leather notebook, and stood up from my chair. I smoothed the wrinkles from my skirt and began packing my briefcase. "You?" Sylvia stammered, her voice shaking with a potent mixture of terror and rage. "You cannot do that. You signed a non-compete agreement. Everything you build belongs to Vanguard." "Actually," I said, slinging my bag over my shoulder, "I did not build it here. I built it on my own personal hardware on weekends, under a private limited liability company registered in Delaware, before I ever signed your work-for-hire agreement." I walked toward the heavy glass doors, the sound of my heels echoing sharply. I stopped just beside Sylvia, who looked as though she was about to pass out right onto the carpet. Her hands were trembling visibly. "You just permanently deleted Vanguard's only authorized access portal to that software," I whispered, keeping my voice low so only she could hear the finality of her doom. Good luck with the board presentation on Monday. I did not look back as I walked out of that glass-walled conference room. The sound of chaos erupting behind me was the perfect soundtrack to my exit. Sylvia was hyperventilating, screaming at the junior analysts to call the IT department and lock down the network. She was completely oblivious to the fact that you cannot lock a door to a house that has already burned to the ground. I handed my badge to the security desk and rode the elevator down. When the cool air of the city hit my face, I allowed myself a genuine smile. The $1 million offer was real. The exit was flawless. After years of grinding in a corporate machine that actively sought to crush me, I finally secured my financial independence. I hailed a taxi to head back to my apartment. As the car merged into downtown traffic, the adrenaline from the boardroom slowly faded, replaced by a familiar creeping dread. My personal life was a relentless, draining battleground. My phone vibrated in my purse. I pulled it out, fully expecting a frantic email from the Human Resources Department. Instead, my stomach plummeted. It was a text message from the building manager of my apartment complex. "Clara, just letting you know your parents and your sister used the spare key you left with us for emergencies. They are up in your unit right now." I gritted my teeth, gripping the phone tightly. 72 hours ago, the fragile illusion of my family's stability had violently shattered, and the toxic aftermath was still bleeding into my life. To understand why I built a secret limited liability company and hoarded my intellectual property, you have to understand the family I was born into. I was the eldest daughter of Howard and Beverly, which in my household simply meant I was the designated workhorse. I paid my own way through college with scholarships and night shifts, while my parents funneled every spare dollar into the social ascendance of my younger sister, Monica. Monica was 30 years old and had never held a job for more than 6 months in her entire life. She was beautiful, charismatic, and armed with a profound sense of entitlement. 3 years ago, she married Andre. Andre was an African-American man with a silver tongue, custom-tailored suits, and a pathological allergy to honest labor. He introduced himself as a tech startup chief executive officer at family gatherings. He would spout empty business buzzwords like synergy and disruptive scalability to anyone who would listen. In reality, his startups were nothing more than vague presentation slides used to solicit money from anyone gullible enough to open their wallets. My parents thought Andre was a genius. They treated him like royalty, praising his entrepreneurial spirit while actively dismissing my rigorous, steady career in risk analytics as unimaginative corporate slavery. As the taxi navigated the streets, my mind pulled me back to that agonizing night, just 3 days before Sylvia threw her spectacular meltdown in the boardroom. I had come home from an exhausting 14-hour shift, desperate for a hot shower, and sleep only to find my apartment occupied. Howard, Beverly, Monica, and Andre sat in my living room. Andre was lounging comfortably on my velvet sofa, wearing a pristine designer jacket that easily cost $2,000. Monica was swiping through her phone, looking bored, while my parents sat rigidly in the armchairs. Their faces wore identical masks of stern expectation. "What is going on here?" I asked, dropping my bag on the entryway table. "Why are you all inside my apartment?" "Sit down right now," Clara Howard commanded. It was not a request, it was an absolute order. "We need to have a serious family discussion. I have been staring at predictive data models since 6 in the morning, Dad. Can this wait until tomorrow?" "No, it cannot," Beverly snapped, adjusting her pearl necklace impatiently. "Andre has a highly time-sensitive opportunity, and you are going to help your family." I sighed heavily, rubbing my pounding temples, and looked directly at my brother-in-law. "What is it this time, Andre?" "Another cryptocurrency mining scheme. A revolutionary application for dog walkers." Andre smiled. It was a slick, practiced grin that never quite reached his eyes. "It is an artificial intelligence-driven logistics platform, Clara. It is going to completely revolutionize global supply chain management. We are in the final seed funding stage right now, but we have a slight liquidity bottleneck. We need capital to secure the server architecture before the end of the quarter." "Translation," Monica chimed in, not even bothering to look up from her social media feed. He needs cash and the bank is being stupid about his credit score. I crossed my arms over my chest. And what exactly does this have to do with me? My mother leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. We know you have been hoarding your money, Clara. You never go on vacations or buy nice clothes. You have exactly $80,000 sitting in a high-yield savings account doing absolutely nothing. I felt the blood drain from my face in an instant. My financial accounts were strictly paperless. The only way they could know that exact figure was if they had opened a stray piece of physical mail I had carelessly left on the kitchen counter during their last visit. You went through my private mail, I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet whisper. We are your parents, Howard said dismissively, waving a hand in the air. Andre needs $80,000 to properly launch his company. We expect you to wire the funds to his business account by tomorrow morning. I stared at them, completely stunned by the sheer audacity of the demand. You want me to empty my entire life savings, the safety net I built so I would not end up homeless in this brutal economy, just to fund Andre's completely imaginary tech company? It is not imaginary, Monica shrieked. You are always jealous of him. Just because you are 33 and alone does not mean you get to ruin my husband's dreams. I am protecting my hard-earned assets, I said, coldly maintaining my composure despite the exhaustion aching in my bones. The answer is no. Absolutely not. Not a single cent. Andre stood up, adjusting his expensive designer jacket. He looked down at me with arrogant hostility. Look, Clara, you are a simple data cruncher. I am a visionary founder. You are giving me this money as an investment in your sister's future. Think of it as your moral duty. Your father bought him that jacket, Beverly yelled. How dare you speak to him that way? You are incredibly selfish, Clara. You have no husband and no children. The least you can do is support the people who actually have a future. The words hit me like a physical blow. To my parents, my life was devoid of value simply because I had not married. My grueling career meant nothing to them. I existed only to serve as a financial resource for the child they loved and her African-American con artist husband. Get out, I said, pointing a steady finger toward the front door. Clara, do not be unreasonable about this. Howard started with a heavy scowl. I said, get out, I yelled. Hand over the spare key right now and get out of my house. They left, but not quietly. Monica called me a bitter spinster. Andre muttered that I was a small-minded wage slave. My mother delivered the final venomous strike just as the elevator doors closed. Without this family, your pathetic little job is all you really have. I locked the door, my hands trembling with rage. Before I could catch my breath, my phone chimed. It was an email from Sylvia. Clara, I need the core source code by Monday morning. If you fail to comply, consider yourself terminated. That was the exact moment my loyalty snapped. My family viewed me as an automated teller machine. My boss viewed me as a stepping stone. They thought I was trapped. They had no idea I had built an ironclad escape route. The flashback dissolved as my taxi pulled up to my apartment building. 3 days had passed since that explosive night. I had ignored dozens of abusive texts from Andre demanding money. I had endured the silent treatment from my parents. I walked into Vanguard Financial this morning with nothing to lose and walked out a millionaire. I walked into the lobby. According to a text from my building manager, my family was upstairs right now. They had used the spare key I forgot to confiscate. They were waiting to ambush me again. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button. I unlocked my door and pushed it open. Howard, Beverly, Monica, and Andre were sitting in my living room looking just as entitled as they had 3 days ago. We are not leaving until you write that check, Howard announced. Andre has investors waiting. You are putting his entire company in jeopardy. I simply smiled, placed my briefcase down, and walked over to the kitchen island. You are incredibly early, I said calmly. I did not expect you to come crawling back so quickly. Do not use that tone, Beverly snapped. We gave you 3 days to cool off. Now get your laptop and initiate the wire transfer. Andre flashed a hollow grin. Come on, Clara. Be a team player. You will give in eventually. You always do. I took a slow sip of water. I am not giving you a dime, Andre, but since you are all here, I have some interesting news. I quit my job at Vanguard Financial today. The room went completely silent. Howard stood up, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. You did what? Howard demanded, his voice thick with disbelief. Are you out of your mind? How are you going to pay for Andre's server architecture now? You selfish brat, Beverly screamed. You quit your job just to avoid helping your sister. You threw away your only source of income out of pure spite. I placed my glass on the counter. I did not throw anything away, Mother. I secured a new position at Apex Financial. I start on Monday as their Senior Director of Quantitative Risk. Andre scoffed loudly, rolling his eyes. Oh, great. Another boring corporate desk job. That does not help my startup, Clara. I looked directly into his dark eyes, letting my smile widen. It comes with a $1 million signing bonus, Andre. Paid in full upon my arrival. The air vanished from the room. Howard stumbled backward. Beverly's mouth fell open, darting frantically between me and my father. Monica let out a gasp. $1 million. The sheer magnitude of the number short-circuited their collective brains. Yes, I continued smoothly. $1 million. A reward for the proprietary algorithm I built on my own time. The same career you all belittled. The dynamic flipped with such violent speed it was comical. The anger and entitlement melted away instantly, replaced by a sickening display of fawning greed. Clara Howard stammered, forcing a wide, unnatural smile. That is incredible news. We always knew you were destined for great things. Oh, sweetheart. Beverly rushed forward. I took a step back. We are so proud of you. This changes everything. Andre clapped his hands together, his eyes gleaming with hunger. $1 million. Clara, this is perfect. You do not just have to fund my seed round. You can become an angel investor. 50,000 is nothing now. I need 500,000 for a 20% stake. We are going to be rich. I watched them eagerly scramble for a piece of my success. They truly believed I was still the obedient daughter who existed only to serve their needs. They thought the money belonged to them by default. Sit down, I said quietly. My tone carried an icy authority that made them freeze in their tracks. What is wrong? Monica asked, looking confused. We are celebrating, I said. Sit down, I repeated. They slowly lowered themselves onto the furniture, watching me with nervous anticipation. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder I had picked up from a private investigator 2 days ago. I am not investing in your company, Andre, I said, tossing the heavy folder onto the coffee table. Because your company does not exist. I stood in the center of my living room, my exhaustion temporarily eclipsed by pure, unadulterated outrage. The sheer audacity of their demand hung in the stale air of my apartment. They wanted $80,000. They wanted the entirety of my life savings, the financial fortress I had meticulously built over a decade of grueling corporate labor to fund a pipe dream. I looked directly at Andre. I am going to give you a financial reality check, I said, keeping my voice dangerously level. You are asking for $80,000 for a seed round. Do you even possess a registered business license? Do you have a functioning prototype? Do you have a single client signed to a letter of intent? Andre sighed heavily, flashing an arrogant smirk. He stood up from my sofa and casually smoothed the lapels of his jacket. It was a pristine camel-colored designer jacket, complete with silk lining and custom stitching. I knew exactly how much it cost because Monica had bragged about it on social media. $2,000. You do not understand venture capitalism, Clara Andre said, his deep voice dripping with condescension. You are too busy crunching numbers in a cubicle to recognize true innovation. Visionaries do not get bogged down by administrative details. We secure the capital first, then we build the infrastructure. You are just a risk-averse corporate drone. You lack the courage to disrupt the market. I pointed a trembling finger at his chest. You are wearing a $2,000 jacket, Andre. If you are such a successful visionary, why are you begging a corporate drone to fund your server architecture? He earned that jacket. Howard interrupted, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. He has been pitching to investors all month. A chief executive officer needs to dress the part. I put it on my credit card as an investment in his professional image. You bought it on your credit card, I repeated, staring at my father in absolute disbelief. Dad, you are 2 years away from retirement. You are financing his luxury wardrobe on credit, and now you want me to empty my savings account to cover his imaginary business expenses. It is not imaginary, Monica screamed, jumping up from the sofa. She pointed an accusing finger at my face. You are just jealous of him. You are jealous that my husband is an ambitious African-American entrepreneur who refuses to settle for mediocrity. You want him to fail so you can feel better about your own miserable life. I am not jealous, I fired back. I am grounded in reality. I have spent years working 60-hour weeks. I skipped vacations. I packed my own lunches. I sacrificed my health to build a safety net so I would never have to depend on anyone else. I am not handing over my security to a man who refuses to hold down a stable job. Beverly stood up, her eyes narrowing with a cruel, calculating coldness. She walked toward me, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. Do not you dare speak to your family about sacrifice, she hissed. You do not know the meaning of the word. You are 33 years old, Clara. You are utterly alone. You have no husband. You have no children. You come home every single night to an empty apartment. Her words struck me like a physical blow to the chest, but she did not stop. You are a selfish, bitter disappointment, my mother continued, her voice rising in volume. Real family supports each other. Real family shares their blessings. Your sister is building a legacy with a brilliant man, and you are trying to sabotage them out of pure spite. What good is all your money if you have no one to share it with? You are hoarding wealth while your own blood relatives are trying to build a future. The room spun slightly. My own mother was standing in my home, weaponizing my single status to extort me. To her, my entire existence was worthless because I had not followed her traditional script. My relentless dedication to my career meant absolutely nothing. I was only valuable as a financial resource for the daughter she actually respected. I looked at Howard, expecting him to intervene to perhaps mitigate the cruelty of his wife. Instead, he crossed his arms and nodded in agreement. Your mother is right, Clara. You have become a cold and selfish woman. I expected better from my eldest daughter. The last frayed thread of my patience finally snapped. The lingering obligation I felt toward these people evaporated in an instant, replaced by a wall of absolute ice. Get out, I said. Clara, do not be unreasonable, Howard commanded, taking a step forward. We are not leaving until we have an agreement. I marched directly to the front door and threw it wide open. I said, get out of my house right now. Hand over the spare key and leave before I call building security to escort you out. Monica let out a dramatic, exaggerated sob, burying her face in Andre's expensive lapel. Andre wrapped a protective arm around her, glaring at me with raw hostility. You are going to regret this, Clara, he warned, his voice low and threatening. When my company goes public, do not come crawling to us for a handout. I would rather starve, I replied coldly. Beverly marched to the door, pulling a silver key from her designer purse. She threw it hard against the floor. It clattered against the wood, sliding to a halt near my shoes. You are no daughter of mine, she spat. Enjoy your miserable, lonely life. They filed out into the hallway. I did not wait for them to reach the elevator. I slammed the heavy wooden door with every ounce of strength I had, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the empty apartment. I immediately turned the deadbolt and engaged the security chain. I leaned against the door, my chest heaving, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. The silence of the apartment felt deafening. I was entirely alone. My family had effectively disowned me over $80,000. Before I could even process the magnitude of the betrayal, my cell phone chimed sharply from my purse. I dragged myself to the entryway table and pulled the phone out. A new email notification lit up the screen. It was marked with high importance. The sender was Sylvia. I tapped the screen, dread pooling in my stomach. Clara, the email read, Your preliminary data models are completely unacceptable. I am taking over the final preparation for the board presentation. You are required to deliver the core source code for the predictive algorithm to my inbox by 8 on Monday morning. If you fail to comply with this directive, I will immediately initiate termination proceedings for gross insubordination. Do not test me on this. I stared at the glowing screen. The dual betrayal was staggering. My family had just attempted to drain my life savings, and now my toxic supervisor was blatantly plotting to steal my intellectual property and fire me. They all thought I was weak. They all thought I was trapped. But as I stood in my quiet apartment looking at Sylvia's threatening email, a spark of pure defiance ignited in the dark. I was not trapped. I was going to burn their entire system to the ground. I did not reply to Sylvia immediately. Engaging with a toxic narcissist when they are in a state of manic control is a massive tactical error. Instead, I walked over to the corner of my living room and pulled the heavy blackout curtains shut. I locked the deadbolt, poured myself a fresh glass of cold water, and sat down at my personal workstation. This was not a standard corporate laptop issued by the Information Technology Department. This was a custom-built processing rig I had assembled myself hidden away in my apartment, paid for entirely with cash. My rig was an absolute beast. I ran a customized secure operating system utilizing a dual-processor motherboard with 128 gigabytes of random access memory purely to handle the massive datasets required to train the predictive model. None of this hardware was expensed to Vanguard. Not a single cooling fan. Not a single cable. I pressed the power button and the triple monitors hummed to life, bathing the dark room in a cool blue glow. Sylvia demanded the core source code by Monday morning. She believed she had me completely cornered because she relied on the standard Vanguard financial employment contract. She assumed that, like every other junior analyst and mid-level strategist in the building, I was firmly bound by the blanket intellectual property clause. The clause that explicitly stated any thought concept or line of code generated during the tenure of employment belonged exclusively to the firm. But Sylvia was lazy. She never read the fine print and she severely underestimated my capacity for self-preservation. 14 months ago, when I first conceptualized the predictive risk algorithm, I saw exactly how Vanguard operated. I watched Sylvia systematically steal credit for 3 different complex data models created by my colleagues. I watched those brilliant colleagues get pushed out, fired, or deliberately sidelined while she collected massive year-end bonuses on the backs of their labor. I knew that if I built a revolutionary machine learning tool on their internal servers, she would slap her name on the presentation and discard me without a second thought. So I orchestrated a preemptive and aggressive legal defense. I opened a secure encrypted folder on my desktop and clicked on a digitized legal document. It was a certificate of incorporation from the state of Delaware. 8 months ago, before I ever typed a single line of actionable code, I quietly established a private limited liability company called Vertex Logic. I structured Vertex Logic with an anonymous registered agent. I opened a separate corporate bank account. I paid the state franchise taxes religiously. My name was shielded from initial public registry searches, meaning Vanguard could run all the background compliance checks they wanted, and they would never trace the corporate entity back to my cubicle. Then I began to build. I established a strict, ironclad protocol for my daily routine. I never worked on the algorithm between the hours of 8 in the morning and 6 in the evening on weekdays. I only touched the project on weekends and federal holidays. I never used Vanguard's network. I never used their hardware. I never even used their proprietary coding languages. I built the entire back-end infrastructure on open-source platforms right here on my personal machine in the absolute privacy of my own home. Once the foundational logic was fully functional, I filed for a formal software copyright under Vertex Logic. The United States Copyright Office processed and approved the application without issue. The algorithm was legally recognized as the exclusive property of my private corporation. The real masterpiece of my legal defense happened 2 months later. The Human Resources Department at Vanguard initiated a company-wide protocol update. They required every single employee in the risk management division to sign a newly revised work-for-hire agreement. The new contract was designed to be aggressively comprehensive. I remembered sitting in Sylvia's lavish corner office as she shoved the thick stack of papers across her mahogany desk. She barely looked up from her phone as she impatiently ordered me to sign the last page. She had not read a single paragraph. The human resources representative who drafted it probably used a generic legal template. I read every single word. The contract explicitly defined company property as any intellectual material developed using Vanguard Financial Resources on Vanguard Financial premises or during designated Vanguard Financial business hours. It was a standard legal net, but because they tried to be overly specific with their definitions to aggressively protect their physical hardware, they left a massive vulnerability. I signed the document with a calm and compliant smile. Because my copyright predated the new contract, and because I strictly isolated my development environment to my own time and equipment, the work-for-hire clause was completely legally impotent against my algorithm. Under United States corporate law, the intellectual property belonged solely to me. I essentially owned a priceless vault, and I was merely renting Vanguard the display case. I spent the next hour carefully reviewing my legal documentation. I verified the timestamps on my code commits, cross-referencing them with my Vanguard timecards to ensure absolute zero overlap. Every single log proved my weekend-only development cycle. The paper trail was completely flawless. If Vanguard attempted to sue me for corporate espionage or intellectual property theft, their own legal department would instantly realize they had no standing before the case ever reached a judge. My phone buzzed aggressively on the desk. It was another email from Sylvia. Clara, I am waiting for an acknowledgement. Send the source code immediately or I will have building security permanently lock your access pass. I let out a soft laugh that echoed in the quiet room. She was getting desperate. The board presentation was the most critical event of her entire career, and she had absolutely nothing to show for it. She desperately needed my algorithm to justify her exorbitant vice president salary. I opened my secure email client and composed a message to Thomas Caldwell, the chief executive officer of Apex Financial. I had secretly reached out to him 3 weeks ago using a heavily encrypted channel to offer him a blind demonstration of the algorithm. He had been highly skeptical at first, but after I accurately predicted a massive real estate default in the Asian market a week before it hit the mainstream news, he realized I was holding the holy grail of modern risk management. Thomas, I typed quickly, my fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard. The timeline has significantly accelerated. Vanguard is attempting a hostile takeover of the asset. I am initiating the extraction protocol immediately. Are your financial terms still valid? I hit send. Less than 2 minutes later, my screen pinged with a direct reply. The terms remain absolute, Clara. We are ready when you are. Bring the asset home. I closed the email client. The trap was fully set. Sylvia wanted the code. She wanted to assert her dominance and crush my spirit. I was going to let her think she had won right up until the exact moment I let her confidently destroy her own career. I logged into the Vanguard remote server using my standard employee credentials. I navigated to the sandbox environment, the highly secure and isolated development space where I had been running the front-end interface of my algorithm. The interface was beautiful, functional, and completely hollow. It was essentially a sophisticated remote control. The actual brain of the software, the machine learning core, lived entirely on my personal server right here in my apartment. The sandbox merely connected to it via a secure application programming interface. I spent the next 3 hours carefully modifying the Vanguard side of the digital connection. I injected a final piece of hidden code into the root directory. It was a fail-deadly mechanism. If anyone with administrative privileges deleted the sandbox directory, the deletion command would trigger a permanent unrecoverable wipe of the connection keys. It would aggressively scramble the underlying registry pathways. It would purge the server logs. It would salt the earth so thoroughly that Vanguard's most elite cybersecurity technicians could spend a decade trying to recover the fragments, and they would find nothing but digital ash. I was not just securing my exit. I was arming a digital explosive, and I was going to hand Sylvia the detonator first thing on Tuesday morning. With the Vanguard trap fully armed, I did not sleep. The digital explosive was set for Tuesday morning, but I still had 48 hours of the weekend remaining to ensure my own financial future was completely bulletproof. Thomas Caldwell at Apex Financial was a strong lead, but in the brutal landscape of corporate finance, accepting the very first offer is a rookie mistake. I knew exactly what my predictive risk algorithm was worth. It was a market disruptor. It was the kind of intellectual property that could instantly elevate a firm from a secondary player to a dominant global force. I needed to leverage that reality. I opened a secure browser window and routed my connection through a virtual private network. Over the next 6 hours, I meticulously compiled 3 encrypted demonstration packages. I targeted the 3 largest tech giants operating in the global fintech space. These were the massive conglomerates that actively poached top talent and aggressively acquired independent startups just to crush their competition. I sent the packages directly to the private inboxes of their chief technology officers. I did not include the core machine learning logic. I only included the verified backtesting results from the 2008 housing crash and the recent Asian market default. The data spoke entirely for itself. By Sunday afternoon, the bidding war had officially commenced. My encrypted email client began to light up. The first response came from a multinational conglomerate based in Silicon Valley. They offered a base salary of $400,000 and a heavily restricted stock options package. I politely declined, citing their lack of aggressive market expansion. 2 hours later, a massive hedge fund in New York countered. They offered a direct buyout of the Vertex Logic intellectual property for $2 million, but required me to sign a 5-year non-compete clause and step away from the development completely. I rejected that instantly. I built the algorithm, and I fully intended to direct its future evolution. I took screenshots of these competing offers, redacted the identifying corporate letterheads, and forwarded them directly to Thomas Caldwell at Apex. I did not include a message. I just let the numbers dictate the urgency. While I was orchestrating a high-stakes corporate bidding war that would permanently alter the trajectory of my entire life, my personal cell phone began to vibrate violently across my desk. I glanced over at the screen. It was a barrage of text messages from Andre. The contrast between my professional reality and my toxic family dynamic was suddenly jarring. Here I was, actively fielding 7-figure acquisition offers from global tech giants, while my unemployed brother-in-law was desperately trying to extort $80,000 from me to fund a fake application. I picked up the phone and opened the message thread. Andre had sent 14 texts in the span of 10 minutes. "You are making a massive mistake, Clara." The first message read, "Your parents are absolutely furious with you. You think you are so smart with your little corporate job," the second message stated. "You are nothing without this family. You are a bitter, lonely woman who is actively trying to ruin her sister's marriage because you cannot find a man of your own." The messages rapidly escalated from petty insults to unhinged threats. "If you do not wire the $80,000 to my business account by Monday morning, I am going to have Howard and Beverly legally disown you," he threatened in a massive block of text. "We will have you removed from the family trust. We will ban you from the holiday gatherings. You will be completely dead to us. Send the money right now, Clara, or you will spend the rest of your pathetic life completely alone." I stared at the glowing screen. A year ago, the threat of parental disownment would have sent me into a spiral of anxiety. I had spent my entire childhood desperately seeking the approval of a mother and father who only viewed me as a convenient financial resource. I had played the role of the dutiful, quiet daughter for 33 years. But the woman who had cried in her pale blue childhood bedroom was gone. The woman standing in this apartment was a hardened corporate strategist who had just engineered the flawless destruction of her toxic supervisor. Andre thought he was holding a knife to my throat. He did not realize I had already walked away from the hostage situation. I did not reply to his desperate demands. I did not type out an angry paragraph defending my choices. I simply tapped the information icon at the top of the message thread. I scrolled down to the bottom of the screen and pressed the red button labeled Block Caller. I confirmed the action. The digital silence that followed was incredibly peaceful. I did the exact same thing to Monica. Then I blocked Howard. Then I blocked Beverly. With 4 simple screen taps, I systematically severed all communication with the people who had spent decades actively draining my spirit. They could scream into the void all they wanted. I was permanently done funding their delusions. Just as I set the phone face down on the desk, my secure email client chimed with a priority notification. It was from Thomas Caldwell. The bidding war tactic had worked flawlessly. The rival offers had forced his hand, pushing Apex Financial to bypass standard human resources negotiations entirely. Attached to the email was a formalized, legally binding employment contract. I opened the portable document format file and read through the terms with meticulous precision. Thomas had matched every single one of my demands. The position was Senior Director of Quantitative Risk, placing me directly beneath the executive board. My base salary was locked in at $500,000 a year with comprehensive benefits and 0 probationary period. But the most important clause was on page 4. Apex formally agreed to license the predictive algorithm from Vertex Logic, allowing me to retain total ownership of the intellectual property. And to secure that licensing agreement, they were authorizing an immediate signing bonus of exactly $1 million payable to my private corporate account within 24 hours of signing. I opened my digital signature application. My hand did not shake. I smoothly traced my name across the bottom line of the contract. I attached the signed document to a fresh email, thanked Thomas for his swift and decisive action, and clicked send. It was officially done. I had secured my financial independence. I had outmaneuvered the biggest tech giants in the industry. I had legally protected my intellectual property, and I had finally cut the toxic anchor of my family completely loose. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and looked at the digital clock on my workstation. It was late Sunday evening. Tomorrow morning, Sylvia was expecting me to walk into the Vanguard financial offices and hand over my life's work. She was expecting a broken compliant victim. She had absolutely no idea that she was about to face a millionaire with nothing left to lose. My moment of peaceful solitude was violently interrupted by the sharp buzz of my apartment intercom. I looked at the wall clock on my desk. It was 7 in the evening. I walked over and pressed the talk button. The voice of my building concierge drifted through the speaker, sounding incredibly apologetic and nervous. "Miss Clara, I am so sorry to bother you. Your father is down here in the lobby. He is causing quite a scene. He is threatening to call the police and demand a forced wellness check if you do not come down immediately." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. A forced wellness check meant uniformed officers knocking on my door. With a private server hosting a $1 million proprietary algorithm sitting in my living room, inviting law enforcement into my apartment was a completely unacceptable risk. Howard knew exactly how to manipulate the system to force my hand. "Tell him I will be down in 5 minutes," I replied calmly. I did not change out of my comfortable clothes to appease them. I slipped a sleek black trench coat over my outfit, grabbed my purse, and headed down to the lobby. Howard was pacing furiously near the front desk. When he saw me step out of the elevator, his face hardened into a mask of aggressive authority. "You blocked our numbers," he demanded loudly, completely ignoring the concierge, who was watching us with wide eyes. "We are celebrating your mother and my 40th wedding anniversary tonight at the Capitol Grill. The entire extended family is already there. Your absence would be a humiliating public embarrassment for us. You are getting in the car right now." I could have refused. I could have walked right back to the elevator and dared him to call the police. But a sudden cold curiosity washed over me. I had $1 million sitting in a signed contract upstairs. I was completely bulletproof. I wanted to see exactly how they behaved when they thought they still held absolute power over me. "Lead the way," I said simply. The Capitol Grill was a notoriously expensive steakhouse in the center of the financial district. We walked into the dimly lit mahogany-paneled restaurant and were immediately escorted to a lavish private dining room in the back. A crystal chandelier hung over a massive oak table. 15 members of my extended family were already seated. Aunts, uncles, and cousins were laughing and passing baskets of warm artisan bread. At the absolute head of the table, sitting in the seat of honor that should have belonged to my father, was Andre. He was wearing the exact same $2,000 camel jacket. Monica sat beside him, dripping in cheap fashion jewelry and flashing a smug, triumphant smile the second I walked through the door. Beverly was seated to Andre's right, looking at him with the kind of pure adoration she had never once directed at me. "Look who finally decided to show up," Monica announced loudly, ensuring the entire room fell silent. "We thought you were too busy sitting alone in your apartment to celebrate this family." I did not engage. I took the only empty seat available, situated at the very far end of the table near the kitchen door. I smoothed my linen napkin over my lap and poured myself a glass of iced water. Andre leaned back in his leather chair and snapped his fingers at the passing sommelier. "Bring us 3 more bottles of the Opus 1 Cabernet," he ordered, with a dismissive wave of his hand. "And keep them coming. We are celebrating tonight." I knew the wine list at this restaurant. Opus 1 was over $300 a bottle. Andre was casually ordering $1,000 worth of wine before anyone had even looked at an appetizer menu. My Aunt Diane, a notoriously nosy woman who thrived on family gossip, leaned across the table. "Andre, you are spoiling us. Business must be absolutely booming for you to treat us all like this." Andre stood up, holding his crystal wine glass high in the air. He waited for the entire room to give him their undivided attention. The smug arrogance radiating off him was almost suffocating. "Family." Andre began, his deep voice carrying perfectly across the private room. "We are not just celebrating 40 years of marriage for Howard and Beverly tonight. We are also celebrating a massive milestone for my technology firm. I am incredibly proud to announce that as of this afternoon, we have officially closed our seed funding round. I secured $150,000 in venture capital to launch our artificial intelligence logistics platform." The room erupted in applause. My aunts and uncles cheered loudly. Monica squealed and wrapped her arms around his neck, kissing his cheek. Beverly clapped enthusiastically, her eyes darting down to the end of the table to glare directly at me. Her look was entirely vicious. It said we did not need your money after all. I sat perfectly still, processing the information. $150,000. Just 3 days ago, Andre was desperately extorting me for $80,000 because he had absolutely zero liquidity. Legitimate venture capital firms do not approve, process, and wire 6-figure investments over a Sunday weekend. The financial world simply does not operate on that timeline. "Congratulations, Andre," I said, making sure my voice cut clearly through the dying applause. "That is a remarkably fast turnaround for weekend institutional funding. Who is the lead angel investor?" The smile on Andre's face faltered for a fraction of a second, but he quickly recovered, flashing his bright, empty teeth. "That is protected under a strict non-disclosure agreement," Clara Andre replied smoothly. "But they are a major private equity group out of Silicon Valley. They saw the disruptive potential of my vision and fast-tracked the capital deployment. It just proves that when you have true talent, the market rewards you. Not all of us are destined to be low-level data entry clerks." A few of my cousins chuckled at the insult. Howard puffed out his chest, looking incredibly proud. "He is a brilliant man," Clara Howard announced to the entire table. "You could learn a lot from his ambition. If you had just supported him when he offered you a ground-floor investment opportunity, you could have shared in this victory. Now you get absolutely nothing." I looked at Howard. I looked at the aggressive sweat forming on his forehead. I looked at the way his hand trembled slightly as he reached for his water glass. Then I looked at Beverly, whose expensive diamond tennis bracelet was noticeably missing from her wrist tonight. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. There was no private equity firm in Silicon Valley. There was no venture capital group. My parents were both 63 years old. They had a fully paid-off home and a joint retirement account they had been funding for 40 years. Andre had not found an investor. He had manipulated my desperate status-obsessed parents into taking out a massive second mortgage on their house to fund his fake company. They had just handed a professional con artist their entire life savings so he could buy $300 bottles of wine and pretend to be a chief executive officer. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my iced water. The urge to expose him right there was incredibly strong, but I forced it down. I was a senior risk analyst. I knew that when an opponent is actively destroying their own portfolio, the best strategy is to let them finish the job. You are completely right, Dad, I said, flashing a calm and terrifying smile that made Andre physically flinch. I am going to get exactly what I deserve. The rest of the dinner proceeded in a sickening display of artificial wealth. Huge platters of dry, aged ribeye and butter-poached lobster tails were delivered to the table. Andre held court loudly explaining the visionary mechanics of his artificial intelligence logistics platform to my completely tech-illiterate relatives. As a senior data strategist who actually built machine learning models for a living, listening to him string together meaningless corporate buzzwords was physically painful. He talked about blockchain integration and cloud-based synergy concepts that had absolutely nothing to do with global supply chains. My extended family ate it up. They nodded enthusiastically, completely mesmerized by the illusion of his success. I kept my eyes on my father. Howard was drinking his expensive wine too fast. He laughed too loudly at Andre's terrible jokes. Every time the waiter approached our end of the table, Howard visibly flinched. It was the distinct body language of a man drowning in financial terror. About an hour into the meal, the air conditioning in the private dining room kicked into overdrive. Howard shivered and reached for his suit jacket draped over the back of his chair. As he pulled the heavy wool garment toward him, he fumbled. The jacket slipped from his grip. As it fell against the back of his chair, a folded piece of heavy cardstock slipped out of the inside breast pocket and drifted directly onto the floor beside my shoe. Howard did not notice. He was too busy arguing with Aunt Diane about golf. I reached down and picked it up. It was not a restaurant receipt. It was a bright pink slip of paper folded twice bearing the unmistakable bold logo of a major national bank. The terrifying reality of modern American debt was neatly printed in black ink across the top. Final notice of default. I unfolded the document under the cover of the heavy linen tablecloth. It was a formal warning regarding a home equity line of credit. The terms were laid out in brutal, undeniable clarity. My parents had leveraged their sprawling colonial house in Fairfield, Connecticut, the same house I grew up in. The 4-bedroom fortress with the manicured lawn and the heated pool. They had owned it outright for 5 years. Now, according to this aggressively pink piece of paper, they had authorized a massive lien against the property, and they had immediately missed the first aggressively high interest payment. My stomach turned to pure ice. They had not found a venture capital firm. They had secretly taken out a massive loan against their primary residence. They had mortgaged the roof over their heads to hand Andre $150,000 in cash. "Dad," I said. My voice was low, but it cut through the boisterous conversation at the table like a freshly sharpened blade. Howard turned to me, his cheeks flushed from the wine. "What is it, Clara?" I pulled my hand from beneath the tablecloth and placed the bright pink banknotice directly on the polished mahogany wood between us. I slid it toward his plate. "What is this?" Howard looked down. The color instantly drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and gray. His hand shot out, snatching the paper off the table with terrifying speed. He shoved it frantically into his pants pocket, his eyes darting around the room to see if anyone else had noticed. "That is private," he hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of panic and sudden rage. "It is none of your business." I ignored his panic and looked directly at Andre, who was suddenly gripping his wine glass very tightly. "You did not secure seed funding from a Silicon Valley private equity firm," I stated loudly, ensuring every single person at the table could hear me. "Your investors are sitting right next to you. You convinced my parents to take out a home equity line of credit on their paid-off home." The entire dining room went completely silent. Aunt Diane stopped chewing her steak. Monica let out a sharp gasp. "Clara, keep your voice down," Beverly ordered, her face flushing with humiliated anger. "This is a private family financial matter." "Private," I repeated, standing up from my chair. "You are allowing this man to brag to the entire family about his business acumen when he is actively draining your retirement assets. He is spending your home equity on $300 bottles of wine right in front of you." "It is a temporary bridge loan," Andre interrupted, standing up to face me. He puffed out his chest, trying to maintain his alpha persona. You do not understand corporate finance, Clara. The capital injection is merely a stepping stone until the institutional money clears next quarter. It is a completely standard business practice. You are a liar, I said coldly. You are going to bankrupt them. Dad, if you default on this loan, the bank is going to foreclose on the Fairfield house. They will take the house and you will have absolutely nothing left. Enough! Howard roared. He slammed his fists onto the table, rattling the expensive crystal glasses. He pointed a shaking finger directly at my face. I will not sit here and allow you to humiliate this family. You are a bitter, jealous spinster. The harsh words echoed in the sudden silence of the room. You are 33 years old and completely alone. Howard continued, his voice dripping with venom. You are entirely obsessed with tearing your sister down because you cannot build a life of your own. You have no husband. You have no children. You have a meaningless job. You are a selfish disappointment who refuses to support real family, so you project your miserable failures onto a man who actually has vision. I looked at the faces of my extended family. Some looked shocked, but most were nodding in quiet agreement. To them, the single woman warning her parents about financial ruin was the villain, while the charismatic con artist spending their inheritance was the victim. There was nothing left to save here. They had chosen their side. I reached into my purse, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and dropped it onto my empty plate to cover my glass of water. Enjoy the wine, Dad, I said softly. I hope it was worth your house. I turned my back on them and walked out of the private dining room. I did not look back when Monica yelled another insult, and I did not flinch when the heavy wooden doors swung shut behind me. I walked straight through the restaurant lobby and pushed through the revolving glass doors. The cool night air of the financial district hit my face. I took a deep cleansing breath. The emotional weight of my family had finally detached from my shoulders. I was free. As I stood on the sidewalk waiting to hail a taxi, my phone vibrated in my trench coat pocket. I pulled it out. The screen displayed a new secure message from Marcus, the private investigator I had hired a week ago when Andre first started demanding cash. I opened the encrypted file. The terrifying reality of Andre's past was finally documented in high resolution. He had 3 active bankruptcies in 2 different states. His tech startup was officially registered as a limited liability company, but the physical address was a post office box located inside a strip mall laundromat in New Jersey. And most importantly, the file contained a criminal record. 2 prior convictions for felony wire fraud. I locked my phone and slid it back into my pocket. My parents were financially tethered to a convicted felon, and when the bank finally came to repossess my childhood home, I was going to be the only one with the cash to buy it right out from under them. I was not in the room to witness the immediate fallout after the heavy glass doors swung shut behind me, but the digital security logs on my personal server recorded every single frantic keystroke of the chaos that followed. The moment I stepped onto the elevator, the suffocating silence inside the boardroom finally shattered. Sylvia stood frozen at the head of the mahogany table. The color had completely drained from her face, leaving her expensive foundation looking like a pale mask. She stared at the empty doorway, her brain desperately trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. She spun around to face the 6 junior analysts who were still sitting in stunned silence. "Get the information technology department up here right now," she shrieked, her voice cracking with raw panic. "Call the director. Tell them it is a Tier 1 network emergency." One of the young analysts scrambled for the conference phone, his hands shaking so violently he dropped the receiver twice before dialing the emergency extension. Sylvia began pacing the length of the room. Her breathing was shallow and erratic. She chewed on her manicured thumbnail, aggressively muttering to herself that I was bluffing. She convinced herself that I was just a low-level data strategist trying to orchestrate a dramatic exit. She believed the company servers were invincible. Less than 5 minutes later, David, the director of information technology, burst through the boardroom doors. He was a seasoned veteran of corporate network infrastructure, a man who rarely rushed for anyone. But a Tier 1 emergency from a vice president warranted a sprint. He was flanked by two senior systems engineers carrying diagnostic laptops. "What happened?" David demanded, dropping his equipment onto the polished table. "We saw a massive unprompted data purge on the 42nd floor node. It was an insubordinate employee," Sylvia lied smoothly, trying to forcibly regain her composure. "Clara deliberately sabotaged the sandbox server before she quit. She deleted the core files for the new predictive risk algorithm. I need you to access the executive trash bin and restore the directory immediately." David frowned. He pulled out his primary laptop and connected it directly to the boardroom server port. He spent 30 seconds typing complex diagnostic commands. His frown deepened into a scowl of intense confusion. Sylvia paced behind him, hovering over his shoulder. "Well, how long is the restoration going to take?" "The board presentation is on Monday morning, David. I need that model compiled and ready for review by tonight." David did not answer her immediately. He opened a second diagnostic window and ran a deep-level root trace on the deleted files. The two senior engineers working beside him exchanged a very nervous glance. "Sylvia," David finally said, keeping his eyes glued to the glowing screen, "our system logs show that the deletion was not initiated by Clara. The command was executed using your specific administrative credentials. You authorized a permanent server wipe using your executive override." Sylvia waved her hand dismissively, her diamond rings catching the light. "That is completely irrelevant right now. I was clearing out corrupted user interface files. Just access the daily server backup and roll the sandbox environment back to its state at 8 o'clock this morning." "I cannot do that," David said softly. "What do you mean you cannot do that?" Sylvia snapped, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "You are the director of this department. We spend $10 million a year on cloud backups and redundant server architecture. Find the backup and restore my files." David finally stopped typing. He slowly turned around in his chair to face her. His expression was a mixture of professional awe and absolute dread. "You do not understand what you just deleted, Sylvia," he explained, his tone completely devoid of any comfort. "I am looking at the residual architecture of the sandbox directory. Clara did not build the algorithm on our servers. There are no core files to restore. There never were." Sylvia stared at him, her mouth opening and closing like a fish suffocating on dry land. She pointed a trembling finger at the blank projector screen. "I just watched it run. It was right there. I saw the code." "You saw a mirror," David corrected her bluntly. What Clara placed in the Vanguard sandbox was not a software program. It was a highly sophisticated, aggressively encrypted application programming interface. It was a digital bridge. That bridge connected our network to an external server hosted by a private corporate entity called Vertex Logic. The junior analysts in the room collectively gasped. Sylvia gripped the edge of the mahogany table to stop herself from collapsing onto the floor. "When you used your executive override to permanently delete that directory, you did not just delete a shortcut," David continued, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "You triggered a failed deadly security protocol that Clara deliberately hard-coded into the bridge. By authorizing a hostile purge, you commanded our server to permanently sever the connection. The protocol aggressively scrambled the encryption keys on our end and completely salted the digital pathways." "Fix it," Sylvia whispered, her eyes wide with unadulterated terror. "Rebuild the bridge. Contact this Vertex Logic company and demand the access keys." David let out a harsh, humorless laugh. He closed his laptop with a loud snap. "You are not listening to me. We do not own this software. Vanguard Financial has absolutely zero legal or technical claim to it. Because it was hosted externally by a private corporation, our daily cloud backups never captured the core logic. We only backed up the empty bridge. And you just burned that bridge to the ground." The reality of her situation finally crashed down on Sylvia with the force of an avalanche. She had not just lost a presentation. She had personally authorized the permanent destruction of Vanguard's only access to $1 billion proprietary asset. "Are you telling me it is gone?" Sylvia asked, her voice dropping to a hollow, broken rasp. "I am telling you that it is worse than gone," David replied coldly, standing up and gathering his equipment. "Vanguard just lost the most advanced predictive model in the financial sector. Worse yet, because you used your executive credentials to execute the wipe without following proper data retention protocols, you are personally liable for the destruction of company access. The cybersecurity team will have to file a mandatory incident report to the chief executive officer by 5 o'clock today. Sylvia stumbled backward, her expensive heels catching on the thick carpet. She collapsed into one of the ergonomic leather chairs, clutching her chest as she struggled to pull oxygen into her lungs. "What am I supposed to tell the board on Monday?" she gasped, staring blankly at the polished wood table. David looked down at her with a mixture of pity and disgust. He had suffered under her arrogant reign for 5 years, and he was clearly enjoying the spectacle of her ultimate downfall. "I suggest you start drafting a very compelling resignation letter," Sylvia David said quietly, "because by Monday morning this company is going to terminate you for gross negligence and their legal department is going to sue you for everything you are worth." David and his engineers walked out of the boardroom, leaving the heavy glass doors open behind them. Sylvia sat completely motionless in the center of the room. The junior analysts slowly began packing their bags, silently abandoning the sinking ship. Her career was completely obliterated in a matter of seconds, all because she arrogantly believed she could steal the work of a woman she fundamentally underestimated. While Sylvia sat hyperventilating in the ruins of her corporate empire, I was stepping out of a taxi across town, securing my million-dollar future, and preparing to watch my family tear themselves apart. I paid the driver and stepped onto the pristine pavement in front of the sleek glass high-rise that housed Apex Financial. The morning sun reflected off the massive revolving doors, casting sharp beams of light across the concrete. I walked through the opulent lobby with a sense of absolute and terrifying purpose. I was no longer a desperate data strategist trying to survive another week of corporate abuse. I was a mercenary delivering a highly coveted weapon to a rival faction. While I rode the private executive elevator up to the penthouse level, the true magnitude of Sylvia's catastrophic error was finally detonating back at Vanguard Financial. She had not just lost a digital asset or ruined a Monday morning presentation, she had effectively bankrupted her entire risk management division. Vanguard was currently in the final stages of negotiating a massive $500 million portfolio management contract with a major international Swiss bank. The entire deal hinged entirely on one specific deliverable. The Swiss executives demanded an airtight self-learning predictive model capable of anticipating global commercial real estate defaults before they triggered international recessions. Sylvia had confidently promised them the exact algorithm I had built. She had staked the entire departmental budget, her personal reputation, and the firm's quarterly revenue projections on that single piece of technology. By maliciously deleting my access bridge, Sylvia had instantly vaporized the only piece of leverage Vanguard possessed. According to the internal gossip that would later leak to me through terrified former colleagues, the chief executive officer of Vanguard walked into the boardroom at exactly 9 o'clock that morning, expecting a revolutionary software demonstration. Instead, he found Sylvia weeping uncontrollably in her ergonomic chair. She was surrounded by frantic cybersecurity engineers who were actively attempting to explain how she had personally authorized the permanent destruction of a billion-dollar digital asset. The fallout was swift, brutal, and completely merciless. The Swiss bank representatives who were listening via a secure conference call line immediately withdrew their $500 million offer. They cited gross technical incompetence and instantly severed all financial ties with Vanguard. The chief executive officer did not even wait for Sylvia to finish her pathetic, sobbing apologies. He ordered corporate security to confiscate her executive badge, seize her company phone, and forcefully escort her out of the building. Her 5-year reign of terror ended with 2 armed guards marching her toward the freight elevator while junior analysts stood on the trading floor and filmed her humiliation on their cell phones. She was handed a single cardboard box containing her personal desk items and pushed out onto the street. I smiled as the elevator doors chimed and opened onto the executive floor of Apex Financial. Thomas Caldwell was waiting for me in the lobby. He was a tall, imposing man with sharp features and a tailored charcoal suit that radiated quiet authority. He did not offer a standard corporate handshake. He simply smiled, gesturing toward the massive corner office overlooking the city skyline. "Welcome to the winning team!" Clara Thomas said, his deep voice booming across the polished marble floor. "My legal department has been working all weekend to finalize your onboarding package. We just need physical signatures on the hard copies." I followed him into his massive office. Two senior corporate attorneys were waiting at a heavy oak conference table. They had thick stacks of legal documents laid out in neat rows, but their expressions were entirely relaxed. There was no tension in this room. There was only the eager anticipation of absolute victory. I took a seat at the table and folded my hands. "Before we finalize the asset transfer," I said calmly, "I want absolute confirmation regarding Vanguard's non-compete clause. Sylvia is currently being escorted out of their building by security. When their legal department realizes what she did, they are going to look for a scapegoat. They will try to claim I violated my employment terms by bringing the algorithm here." The lead attorney, a sharp woman named Eleanor, wearing a pristine white suit, slid a heavily documented legal brief across the table toward me. She tapped the top page with her silver pen. "You have absolutely nothing to worry about," Clara Eleanor explained with a confident and predatory smile. "We ran a full diagnostic on your employment contract. By executing a hostile permanent deletion of your work environment using executive override credentials, Sylvia committed an egregious breach of the implied covenant of good faith and fair dealing. Furthermore, because she maliciously targeted your access portal without proper human resources authorization, it legally qualifies as constructive discharge." Thomas leaned against the edge of the mahogany desk, crossing his arms. "Vanguard broke the contract first," he added. "They destroyed the digital workspace. Under United States labor law, their aggressive actions instantly voided any restrictive covenants you signed. Your non-compete is entirely unenforceable. They cannot sue you, and if they even try to send a cease and desist letter, Eleanor will personally bury their legal team in countersuits for intellectual property harassment and corporate defamation." I looked down at the documents. My legal armor was completely impenetrable. I had outsmarted Sylvia, bypassed Vanguard's corporate machine, and legally insulated my million-dollar asset from any future litigation. They had no claim to my work, and they had no claim to my future. "Are we ready to execute the transfer?" Thomas asked, stepping forward and offering me a heavy gold fountain pen. I took the pen. The cold metal was incredibly solid in my grip. I flipped to the final page of the master agreement. I did not hesitate for a single second. I smoothly traced my signature across the dotted line, legally binding the Vertex Logic predictive algorithm exclusively to Apex Financial. Eleanor immediately stamped the document and handed it to her associate. The associate typed a rapid sequence of commands into his encrypted tablet. Less than 10 seconds later, my personal cell phone vibrated deep inside my purse. I pulled the phone out and looked at the glowing screen. It was an automated notification from my private corporate banking application. "Incoming wire transfer approved, originating from Apex Financial Corporate Holdings. Amount is exactly $1 million. Available balance is $1,080,412. I stared at the numbers. The sheer reality of the digits washed over me in a wave of profound electric relief. I was no longer a wage slave terrified of missing a rent payment. I was no longer a victim trapped under the boot of a toxic supervisor. I was no longer the financial backup plan for a family that actively despised me. I was a self-made millionaire sitting in a corner office of the most powerful financial firm in the city. "Congratulations," Clara Thomas said, extending his hand. "Let us get to work." I shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, Thomas. The back-end server access keys will be transferred to your lead engineers within the hour." As I walked out of Thomas Caldwell's office to claim my new executive workspace, my phone vibrated again. It was not a bank notification this time. It was an incoming call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail and checked the automated audio transcript a minute later. It was David, the director of information technology at Vanguard. "Clara, please call me back immediately," the frantic transcript read. "The chief executive officer wants to offer you a vice president title and double your previous salary if you can restore the sandbox connection. Sylvia is completely gone. Please, Clara, The entire department is going to collapse without that model. Name your absolute price. I deleted the voicemail with a single tap of my thumb and permanently blocked the number. Vanguard Financial was already dead to me. My focus was now solely on the upcoming demolition of my toxic family. My transition into the executive hierarchy of Apex Financial was seamless and aggressively efficient. I did not spend my first week attending pointless orientation seminars or navigating toxic office politics. Apex was a machine built for absolute market dominance, and they handed me the keys to the engine on my very first morning. My new corner office featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the financial district, a private assistant named Sarah, who anticipated my needs before I even voiced them, and a team of 12 elite quantitative analysts who actually respected my technical authority. By Wednesday, the predictive risk algorithm was fully integrated into the Apex mainframe. Thomas Caldwell did not waste a single second capitalizing on our new technological advantage. He called an emergency executive committee meeting on Thursday morning. The boardroom at Apex was vastly different from Vanguard. There was no mahogany table. There were no terrified junior employees. It was a sleek, minimalist space filled with Apex predators who communicated exclusively in profit margins and hostile takeovers. Clara Thomas began standing at the head of the glass table. Your algorithm has already saved us $40 million by flagging a hidden liquidity crisis in the European bond market. The board is thrilled. But risk mitigation is only half of your mandate as senior director. We have a massive surplus of acquisition capital this quarter. I want you to shift your focus from defense to offense. Use your model to identify highly distressed assets in the financial sector. Find me a bleeding target we can acquire, strip for parts, and liquidate for a massive profit. I looked around the room at the expectant faces of the executive team. A slow, calculated smile spread across my face. I did not even need to run a new diagnostic sweep on the algorithm to identify the most lucrative distressed asset in the city. The target was already bleeding out, and I was the one who had slashed its throat. I already have a primary target, Thomas, I said, leaning forward and tapping my tablet to cast my presentation onto the main wall monitor. I want to aggressively short the stock of Vanguard Financial, and then I want to launch a hostile takeover of their entire risk management division. A murmur of surprise rippled through the executives. Thomas raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued by the sheer audacity of my proposal. Vanguard is a major competitor, Clara. They are bruised, but they are not a distressed asset. They are entirely distressed, I countered smoothly, bringing up a real-time financial graph on the screen. As of Monday morning, Vanguard lost their $500 million portfolio contract with the Swiss banking consortium. But that was just the initial shockwave. What the broader market does not know yet is exactly why they lost that contract. They lost it because their vice president of risk assessment maliciously destroyed their only functioning predictive model. They are flying completely blind in a highly volatile market. I swiped my screen, pulling up a series of internal data points I had legally scraped from public corporate filings over the last 48 hours. Vanguard is currently attempting to cover up a catastrophic vulnerability. Their remaining risk models are outdated legacy systems. They cannot accurately predict market fluctuations. Within the next 72 hours, they are going to advise 3 of their largest institutional clients to hold positions on a series of commercial real estate funds that my algorithm predicts will completely collapse by next Tuesday. The room was dead silent. The Apex executives stared at the undeniable mathematical proof glowing on the wall monitor. When those funds collapse, I continued, keeping my voice cold and precise. Vanguard's clients are going to lose hundreds of millions of dollars. The resulting lawsuits for fiduciary negligence will completely bankrupt their risk department. Their stock price will enter a free fall. That is exactly when we strike. We let them crash, we buy the shattered remains of their department for pennies on the dollar, and we automatically inherit their entire surviving client roster because we will be the only firm with the technology capable of saving them. Thomas Caldwell stared at me for a long, silent moment. He looked at the data, Then he looked at me. He was not just looking at a data strategist anymore. He was looking at a corporate assassin. That is incredibly ruthless, Clara Thomas said softly. It is incredibly profitable, I corrected him. They built a culture of exploitation and incompetence. I am simply allowing the free market to correct their mistakes. Thomas broke into a massive, genuine grin. He turned to his lead acquisition attorney. Eleanor mobilized the hostile takeover team immediately. I want the paperwork drafted and ready to file the exact second Vanguard stock dips below $20 a share. Clara, you have absolute authority over this acquisition. Bleed them dry. The rest of the week was a blur of high-stakes corporate warfare. I worked directly with Eleanor and the acquisition team, legally structuring a predatory buyout that would leave Vanguard's executive board completely defenseless. Every time I looked at the stock ticker on my office monitor, I watched the red line of Vanguard Financial creep further downward. The rumors of their technological collapse were already starting to leak to the financial press. Panic was quietly spreading across their trading floor. By Friday afternoon, my prediction became a brutal reality. The commercial real estate funds I had flagged officially collapsed. Vanguard's institutional clients suffered catastrophic losses. At exactly 2 o'clock, the financial news networks broke the story. Vanguard Financial was facing multiple massive lawsuits for gross fiduciary negligence. The camera crews were camped outside the very building I had walked out of just 5 days ago. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows in my corner office, holding a cup of artisan coffee, watching the stock ticker on my wall monitor. Vanguard's share price plummeted from $80 down to $40, then $30, then $25. It was a complete and utter bloodbath. The company that had happily allowed Sylvia to exploit me for 14 months was rapidly disintegrating into financial dust. My desk phone rang. It was my assistant, Sarah. Miss Clara, Sarah said briskly. I have a highly urgent call holding on line 1. It is the Chief Executive Officer of Vanguard Financial. He is bypassing his assistants and demanding to speak with you directly. He sounds extremely frantic. I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring the rich flavor. The man who had likely ignored my existence for over a year was now personally calling to beg for mercy. He knew I had the algorithm. He knew Apex was positioning for a hostile takeover. He was backed into a corner with absolutely no way out. Put him through, Sarah, I replied calmly. And please record the call for our legal acquisition records. I walked over to my desk and pressed the flashing button on the speakerphone. I did not offer a greeting. I just let the heavy silence hang in the air, forcing him to speak first. Clara, the chief executive officer, gasped. His voice was completely stripped of its usual arrogant authority. He sounded like a man standing on the edge of a cliff. Please, we need to negotiate. You have to stop this Apex acquisition. Name your price. We will give you anything you want. I smiled at the speakerphone. You have absolutely nothing left that I want, I said quietly. Enjoy the free fall. I reached out and disconnected the call. The corporate revenge was complete. Now I had $1 million and an entire weekend ahead of me to focus entirely on dismantling Andre and the toxic family that had tried to drain my life savings. By Tuesday of my second week at Apex Financial, the Vanguard acquisition was in its final regulatory stages. I was reviewing the newly integrated client portfolios when Human Resources forwarded a highly amusing file to my secure inbox. It was an application for a mid-level quantitative analyst position in my newly expanded risk division. Attached was a desperately padded resume belonging to Sylvia. She had completely omitted her disastrous final week at Vanguard. She listed herself as an independent financial consultant currently seeking new enterprise challenges. It was a pathetic attempt to rebrand her catastrophic termination. I immediately instructed my assistant to bypass the standard phone screening and schedule Sylvia for an in-person interview at 2 o'clock that afternoon. At precisely 2 o'clock, I walked into conference room B. Sylvia was already sitting at the glass table wearing a sharply tailored navy suit that likely cost more than her upcoming rent payment. She had her professional smile plastered on her face, completely ready to charm a junior human resources recruiter. I opened the heavy glass door and stepped inside. The smile instantly vanished from Sylvia's face. The blood drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking exactly as pale and terrified as she had the moment David explained she had destroyed Vanguard's software. She gripped the leather arms of her chair so tightly her knuckles turned entirely white. "Clara," she whispered, her voice barely functional. "What are you doing in here?" I walked around the table and took the seat directly across from her. I placed her printed resume on the glass surface and folded my hands. "I am the Senior Director of Risk Acquisition at Apex Financial," I stated calmly. "You applied for a mid-level position in my department. I handle the final interviews for all my subordinates." Sylvia swallowed hard. She looked at the door, clearly calculating the social cost of simply running away. But desperation kept her glued to the chair. She had been fired for cause. She had lost her massive severance package. She was legally toxic in the financial district, and Apex was likely the only firm that had even responded to her frantic applications. I picked up her resume and scanned the crisp white paper. "You list your most recent experience as a vice president at Vanguard Financial. You claim you spearheaded the integration of predictive modeling for commercial real estate portfolios." I looked up, meeting her terrified gaze. "That is a fascinating bullet point, Sylvia, because according to the mandatory public disclosures Vanguard filed yesterday during our hostile takeover, that specific predictive model was maliciously deleted by an incompetent executive, triggering a total departmental collapse." "That was a technical misunderstanding," Sylvia stammered, her voice shaking violently. "The IT department made a critical error during a routine server migration." I dropped the paper onto the table. "Stop lying. I built the model. You stole it. Then you destroyed it because you were too arrogant to understand the basic mechanics of the software you claimed to manage." Sylvia shrank back in her chair. The immense power she used to wield over me was completely eradicated. She was just a desperate, unemployed middle manager begging for a paycheck from the woman she had actively tormented. "Please, Clara," Sylvia begged, the professional facade completely shattering. "The legal fees from Vanguard's lawsuit are bankrupting me. I cannot get a reference. I just need a starting position. I can do the data entry. I will report directly to you." "You are not qualified to do data entry in my department," I replied coldly. "You possess no actual technical skills. Your entire career was built on exploiting the labor of women who were vastly more intelligent than you. You have absolutely nothing of value to offer Apex Financial." I stood up and smoothed the front of my designer skirt. "Your application is formally rejected. Security will escort you out of the building. Do not ever apply to this firm again." I turned my back on her and walked out of the conference room, leaving Sylvia quietly sobbing at the polished glass table. The corporate ghost of my past was officially exorcised. Now it was time to turn my undivided attention toward the festering parasite that was currently consuming my family. 2 days after I threw Sylvia out of my conference room, my quiet corporate victory became extremely public. On Thursday morning, the Global Financial Times published a sprawling front-page feature detailing Apex Financial's aggressive takeover of Vanguard's shattered risk division. The reporter had dug deep into the mechanics of the acquisition. Right in the center of the article, framed by a high-resolution professional headshot my assistant had provided, was my name. The journalist branded me the undisputed architect of the Vertex logic algorithm. More importantly, an anonymous inside source had leaked the exact financial terms of my defection. The article explicitly detailed my unprecedented $1 million signing bonus. It listed my new base salary. It described my elevated status as senior director. For the first 33 years of my life, my family had aggressively controlled the narrative of my failure. Now, the most respected financial publication in the country had just printed undeniable mathematical proof of my massive success, and there was absolutely nothing they could do to spin it. I knew exactly how the morning played out in the Fairfield house. The first brutal payment for their home equity line of credit was due in less than a week. Andre was likely offering them empty promises about delayed venture capital funds while continuing to drain their checking accounts to fund his lavish lifestyle. The financial terror was slowly suffocating them. And then, Howard opened his morning newspaper on his tablet. He saw the numbers. The daughter he had publicly humiliated and labeled a jealous spinster was suddenly sitting on a mountain of liquid cash. I did not have to wait long for the inevitable reaction. At exactly 2 o'clock on Friday afternoon, the intercom on my desk chimed. My assistant Sarah spoke in a crisp, professional tone. Miss Clara, the lobby security desk just called up. You have 4 unannounced visitors requesting immediate access to your floor. They are claiming to be your immediate family. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair and smiled. Let them up, Sarah, I replied smoothly. But do not bring them to my office. Leave them in the main executive reception area. I want them to wait. I let them sit there for precisely 25 minutes. I wanted them to absorb the sheer scale of the wealth surrounding them. The Apex reception area was a masterpiece of intimidating corporate architecture. The walls were clad in imported Italian marble. The furniture was sleek and unforgiving. Every single person walking past them was a millionaire wearing a bespoke suit. My family was about to feel incredibly small. When I finally opened my heavy oak door and stepped out into the reception area, the visual contrast was striking. Howard, Beverly, Monica, and Andre were huddled together near a frosted glass partition. They looked completely out of place. Howard was wearing his best Sunday suit, but it looked cheap under the harsh, expensive lighting. He was clutching a massive, completely absurd arrangement of white orchids. Beverly was wringing her hands nervously. Monica was aggressively scanning the room, her eyes wide with undisguised greed. Andre stood slightly behind them, shifting his weight from foot to foot, looking exactly like a cornered rat who had just discovered the ultimate piece of cheese. The moment they saw me, the theatrical performance began. Clara Howard gasped, stepping forward with his arms opened wide. His eyes were actually welling up with fake tears. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. We are so incredibly proud of you. He tried to pull me into a hug, but I took a single deliberate step backward. My expression remained entirely blank. The orchids hovered awkwardly in the air between us. Beverly immediately rushed forward, grabbing my forearm with frantic, gripping fingers. Oh, Clara, we saw the article this morning. We always knew you were destined for greatness. You are so brilliant. We have just been so worried about you working so hard all by yourself. Family is everything, Clara. We have missed you so much. I looked down at her hand clutching my arm. Remove your hand, Beverly, I said. My voice was low, flat, and completely devoid of warmth. Beverly flinched as if I had physically struck her. She yanked her hand back, her fake smile faltering for a fraction of a second before she forced it back into place. Monica stepped up next, pushing her designer sunglasses to the top of her head. Clara, she said, adopting a sickeningly sweet tone she had not used on me since we were 10 years old. We were entirely out of line at the restaurant last week. Tensions were just high. Dad was stressed. We all say things we do not mean when we are stressed. But we are sisters. We share a bond that nothing can break. We want to celebrate this massive win with you. I looked at the 4 of them standing in my lobby. They were utterly pathetic. A week ago, I was a failure who deserved to be screamed at in a public restaurant. Now I was their ultimate financial savior. You did not come here to celebrate, I stated, locking eyes with my father. You came here because the first payment on your home equity line of credit is due on Tuesday, and you do not have the liquid cash to cover it. You came here because you read the Global Financial Times, saw my $1 million signing bonus, and immediately calculated how much of my money you could extract to cover your own catastrophic mistakes. Howard's face turned a violent shade of red. Clara, that is a horrible thing to say. We came here to apologize. We came here out of love. Love, I echoed, letting out a short, hollow laugh. You publicly disowned me in a steakhouse because I tried to warn you that Andre was a con artist. You called me a bitter spinster. You chose to fund a convicted felon over trusting your own daughter. Andre suddenly stepped forward, puffing out his chest to project false confidence. Now listen here, Clara. The venture capital is just tied up in standard regulatory red tape. It is a temporary cash flow issue. We are all family here. If you could just provide a short-term bridge loan to cover the house payments for the next 2 months, my institutional investors will reimburse you with a massive interest yield. It is a guaranteed return on investment. I stared at Andre with absolute disgust. A bridge loan. You want me to hand you my money so you can pretend to save my parents from the disaster you explicitly created? I turned my attention back to my parents. They were looking at me with desperate, pleading eyes. They were completely willing to let Andre continue his scam as long as my bank account took the damage instead of theirs. I am not a bank, I said, my voice echoing slightly in the large marble room. And I am absolutely not your family anymore. You made your choice. You chose the golden child and her visionary husband. You leveraged your primary residence to fund his delusions. Now you get to live with the consequences. Clara, please! Beverly sobbed, finally dropping the fake smile. Her desperation was genuine now. If we default on this payment, the bank is going to initiate foreclosure proceedings. We will lose the house. We will lose everything. I looked her directly in the eyes. I know, I replied softly. I saw the pink slip, remember? I told you exactly what was going to happen. I turned to Sarah, who was watching the entire exchange from her secure desk. Sarah, please call security and have these 4 individuals escorted out of the building. If they ever return to this property, have them arrested for criminal trespassing. I did not wait to hear their screams of outrage or their frantic apologies. I simply turned around, walked back into my corner office, and locked the heavy oak door behind me. Let the bank take the house. I was already preparing my cash offer. I had barely taken 2 steps toward my desk when a violent pounding rattled my office door. The heavy oak vibrated against its hinges. Security had not arrived yet, and Andre was clearly unwilling to let his ultimate payday walk away. I turned around, gripped the brass handle, and yanked the door open, fully prepared to physically push him away. But Andre had completely dropped the panicked, supportive son-in-law routine. He stood in the doorway holding a glossy, spiral-bound prospectus. His eyes were wide with a predatory, manic energy. The sheer audacity of his pivot was absolutely breathtaking. He had instantly recognized that begging for mortgage help was a losing strategy, so he switched back to his primary con. Forget the Fairfield house, Andre commanded loudly, throwing my parents entirely under the bus. That is small money. They made a bad investment. You, on the other hand, are sitting on $1 million of liquid capital. I am offering you the ground floor, Clara. Howard and Beverly stared at him in absolute shock. He had just dismissed their impending homelessness as a bad investment right in front of them. Andre shoved the shiny folder toward my chest. I need $500,000 to scale my server infrastructure. With your algorithm and my visionary logistics platform, we will completely dominate the market. You actually have a moral obligation to do this. Monica is your sister. You owe it to her family to provide for your future nieces and nephews. He stood there, chin raised, completely convinced that his aggressive alpha male routine would force my submission. He believed he was entitled to half of my signing bonus simply because he had married my sister. I looked at the glossy folder in his hands. Then I looked at my parents, whose faces were rapidly draining of color as they finally realized they had been entirely used. The dramatic irony was so perfect I could not stop the slow, genuine smile that spread across my face. Sarah, cancel the security call, I announced over my shoulder. I stepped back and pushed the door wide open, gesturing toward the sleek leather guest chairs positioned in front of my desk. Please, I said, my voice dripping with dangerous politeness. Come in, all of you. Sit down. Let us discuss your visionary enterprise. Andre smirked, clearly believing he had successfully dominated the negotiation. He strode into my office and took a seat, aggressively crossing his ankle over his knee. Monica followed closely behind him, looking smug. Howard and Beverly hesitated, their expressions shifting to absolute dread, before finally stepping inside and standing awkwardly against the glass wall. I walked around my desk and sat in my high-backed executive chair. I did not open his ridiculous prospectus. Instead, I reached into my bottom drawer, unlocked my secure filing cabinet, and pulled out the thick manila envelope I had received from Marcus, my private investigator. I dropped the heavy file onto the center of the pristine desk with a loud, authoritative slap. Let us talk about your infrastructure. Andre, I began sliding the first document out of the folder. Because according to this certified background check, your corporate headquarters is a post office box located inside a New Jersey laundromat, and your primary qualification for managing a $500,000 investment is a pair of felony wire fraud convictions. The smug smile instantly vanished from Andre's face. The room went completely suffocatingly silent. Andre stared at the manila folder sitting on my desk. The smug, predatory confidence that had defined his entire personality for the past year evaporated in a fraction of a second. His jaw tightened. He darted a panicked glance toward the heavy oak door, as if calculating the exact distance required to sprint out of the executive suite and escape the incoming devastation. Monica was the first to break the heavy silence. She let out a sharp, dismissive laugh that echoed awkwardly against the imported marble walls of my office. That is completely ridiculous, Clara. You are just making things up because you are jealous of his success. You have always been jealous of me. Tell her, Andre. Tell her she is crazy. Andre did not say a word. He just kept staring at the file like it was a live explosive. I picked up the first sheet of paper. It was a certified copy of corporate registration documents. I held it up so the harsh recessed lighting of the office illuminated the official state seal. You registered a limited liability company in the state of Delaware 6 months ago. I read aloud, my voice perfectly steady and devoid of any emotion. You named it Apex Logistics and Synergy Holdings, a very impressive collection of buzzwords. However, according to the Delaware Division of Corporations, this entity has 0 physical assets, 0 intellectual property filings, and 0 registered employees other than yourself. It is a textbook shell company designed exclusively to receive untraceable wire transfers. That is a standard tax mitigation strategy for early-stage startups. Andre sputtered, his voice cracking slightly. His face was rapidly turning a blotchy, uneven red. You do not understand high-level corporate structuring. The venture capital world moves fast. I slid the Delaware registration aside and picked up a thicker stack of papers. These were bank records, highly detailed, deeply incriminating financial ledgers that my private investigator had paid a significant sum to legally obtain. I understand financial transactions perfectly, I countered smoothly. I am a senior director at a billion-dollar wealth management firm. Let us trace the money. Specifically, let us trace the exact $150,000 my parents foolishly pulled from their home equity and handed directly to you. Howard let out a strangled gasp. He stepped away from the glass wall and stumbled toward one of the leather guest chairs, practically collapsing into it. The cheap fabric of his Sunday suit bunched up around his shoulders. Beverly stood frozen behind him, her hands clamped tightly over her mouth, her eyes wide with mounting terror. According to these records, I continued tracing my perfectly manicured finger down the itemized ledger. The capital did not go toward server infrastructure. It did not go toward blockchain integration, or software development, or any of the meaningless garbage you spouted at the dinner table. On the exact day my father wired the funds into your Delaware shell company, you executed 3 separate outbound international transfers. I looked up and made direct eye contact with my father. His skin had turned a sickly ashen gray. He looked 10 years older than he had when he walked into my lobby. $50,000 was wired to an offshore bank account located in the Cayman Islands. I stated clearly, projecting my voice so every single person in the room heard the exact figure. An account heavily associated with an unregulated online sports betting syndicate. You did not secure seed funding, Andre. You secured a bankroll to feed a massive, out-of-control gambling addiction. Lies, Andre shouted violently, jumping up from his chair. He lunged toward my desk, desperately reaching for the documents. Give me those right now. You fabricated those records to ruin my marriage. I did not flinch. I did not even lean back in my ergonomic chair. I simply pressed a small, discreet silver button located under the lip of my mahogany desk. "Sit down, Andre," I commanded, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. "Or I will have the armed security guards waiting in the lobby drag you out of this building in handcuffs. And I will personally ensure the police find these financial documents in your pockets when they book you for criminal trespass." Andre froze halfway across the expensive rug. He looked at my cold expression, then looked at the heavy door. He knew I was not bluffing. He slowly backed away and sank back into his chair, his chest heaving as he breathed heavily. Monica was shaking now. She looked at her husband, her perfectly contoured face contorting with a horrifying realization. "Andre," she whispered, her voice trembling so badly she could barely form the words. "What is she talking about? Where is the money? Where is the money my parents gave you?" I did not give him a chance to spin another lie. I picked up the next page of the bank ledger and held it up for them to see. The second transfer was for $75,000, I read, ensuring every syllable landed like a physical blow against their fragile egos. This money did not go offshore. It went directly to a domestic account operating out of Las Vegas, Nevada. The registered owner of this account is a man named Vincent Rossi. I paused, letting the harsh name hang in the air. I looked at Andre, who was now sweating profusely. The collar of his expensive dress shirt was completely soaked. "Vincent Rossi is not a venture capitalist," I explained to my terrified family. "According to the federal criminal database, Mr. Rossi is a known associate of an organized crime syndicate operating in Clark County. He is a predatory loan shark. You are not raising capital to scale a legitimate business, Andre. You were desperately stealing your in-laws' retirement equity to pay off a massive underworld debt so they would not break your legs in a casino parking lot." "Oh my God," Beverly wailed, finally breaking down completely. She fell to her knees on the expensive carpet, burying her face in her hands, no longer caring about her public image. "The house. Howard, we are going to lose the house. We have nothing left." Howard was hyperventilating. He clutched his chest, gasping for air, as if the room had suddenly run out of oxygen. He looked at Andre, the golden son-in-law he had worshipped, the charismatic man he had chosen over his own blood daughter. "You stole from us," Howard croaked, tears of pure despair streaming down his face. "You looked me in the eye at my own dinner table and promised me a return on my investment. You ruined my life." Andre looked around the room like a cornered animal, realizing the trap had finally snapped shut. The polished veneer of the visionary tech CEO was completely gone, leaving only the pathetic, desperate con artist underneath. He turned to Monica, reaching out to grab her hand. "Baby, listen to me," he pleaded, his voice reducing to a pathetic whine. "I can fix this. I just need a little more time. I was going to hit a massive parlay. The odds were guaranteed. I was going to pay them back double. I just hit a bad streak. I swear I am good for it." Monica snatched her hand away as if he had physically burned her. She stared at him with absolute unadulterated disgust. "A bad streak," she shrieked, her voice echoing off the glass walls. "You mortgaged my parents' home to pay off the mafia. You told me we were moving to Silicon Valley." I watched them tear each other apart right in the middle of my office. It was a beautiful, chaotic symphony of karma. They had built their entire social identity around the illusion of wealth superiority and my supposed failure. I had just detonated a nuclear bomb in the center of their reality, and the fallout was glorious. But I was not quite finished. "There is still $25,000 unaccounted for," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through their screaming match. The room quieted down just enough for them to hear my final execution order. I flipped to the final page of the file. A collection of high-resolution glossy photographs slid out onto my pristine desk. I picked one up and tossed it casually across the table toward Monica. It fluttered in the air before landing perfectly in her lap. The remaining $25,000 was used to lease a luxury apartment on the Upper East Side, I informed her, watching the last shred of her dignity shatter. "And based on these surveillance photos my investigator captured last week, Andre has been using that apartment to entertain a 22-year-old fitness instructor while you were busy picking out curtains for your imaginary California mansion." Monica looked down at the photograph in her lap. She stared at the undeniable proof of her husband walking arm in arm with another woman. She let out a guttural, agonizing scream that finally signaled the absolute end of our family. The scream ripped through the sterile acoustic dampening of my executive office. Monica hurled the glossy photograph onto the floor as if the photo paper itself were coated in acid. She grabbed the edge of my desk, her perfectly manicured acrylic nails scraping against the mahogany wood. "You fabricated this!" she shrieked, her face twisted into a mask of pure denial. "You hired someone to Photoshop this. You are so desperate to ruin my marriage. You are literally inventing affairs." I did not argue with her. I simply reached back into the manila envelope and pulled out a secondary stack of legally notarized documents. I slid them across the desk until they rested directly under her shaking hands. "I do not need to use Photoshop when your husband leaves a completely transparent paper trail," I said calmly. "Look at the documents, Monica. That is a 12-month residential lease agreement for the apartment on the Upper East Side. It is signed in black ink by Andre. And right beneath it are the corresponding bank receipts for the security deposit and the first 3 months of rent. He paid for his mistress's luxury apartment using the exact money our parents borrowed against their home equity." Monica stared at the distinct looping signature of her husband. Her denial shattered instantly, replaced by a hollow, terrifying realization. She turned her head slowly, looking at Andre with eyes completely devoid of warmth. Howard let out a broken, wheezing sob. He fell out of the leather guest chair, landing on his knees beside Beverly on the imported carpet. They were no longer the arrogant, judgmental parents who had belittled my career at the steakhouse. They were two broken, aging people who had just realized they had financed their own destruction. "How long do we have?" Howard whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of his absolute ruin. I pulled a bright pink envelope from my desk drawer. It was a duplicate copy of the bank notice I had seen slip from his coat pocket. "I have been monitoring the public banking ledger," I informed them coldly. "The bank officially registered your default this morning. You have exactly 14 days before the county sheriff arrives at the Fairfield house to physically remove you from the premises and change the locks. You are going to be completely homeless in 2 weeks." Andre backed away toward the heavy oak door. His chest was heaving. He realized the trap was completely sealed. He was not just facing a divorce or angry in-laws. He was standing in a room with a senior financial director who held indisputable, legally obtained evidence of his federal wire fraud. "Where are you going?" Monica screamed, lunging toward him. She grabbed the lapels of his expensive suit. "You are going to fix this. You are going to give my parents their money back." "Get off me," Andre snarled. The mask of the charismatic visionary completely dropped, revealing the violent, cornered criminal underneath. He grabbed Monica by her shoulders and shoved her violently backward. She stumbled over the edge of the leather chair and crashed hard into the glass wall, completely stunned. Before anyone else could react, Andre yanked the heavy office door open and sprinted out into the executive reception area. He did not look back. He was running from the inevitable federal indictment, leaving his ruined wife and bankrupt in-laws bleeding on the floor of my office. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind Andre, leaving a vibrating silence in its wake. Monica slid down the glass partition, pulling her knees to her chest as she stared blankly at the empty doorway. The illusion of her perfect life had just sprinted down the hallway to evade a federal prison sentence. But my parents did not watch him leave. The second the door closed, they turned their entire focus back to me. They were already on the floor, surrounded by the scattered bank documents that detailed their absolute financial ruin. Howard dragged himself forward, closing the distance between us until his hands gripped the edge of my mahogany desk. "Clara, you have to help us," Howard pleaded, his voice completely raw. The arrogance that usually laced his tone was entirely gone, replaced by a suffocating, pathetic desperation. He looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. "He is gone. The money is gone. You are the only one left." Beverly crawled forward to join him, her expensive jewelry clinking against the imported rug. She reached up and tried to grab my hand, but I smoothly pulled it back and folded my arms across my chest. "You have $1 million sitting in your bank account right now." Beverly sobbed, tears ruining her perfectly applied makeup. We saw the article. You have more than enough cash to pay off the bank and clear the lien. You can save the Fairfield house today. Please, Clara. We are your parents. We gave you life. We raised you in that house. I stared down at them. It was a fascinating psychological display. Even now completely broken and facing absolute ruin, they instinctively resorted to manipulation. They were trying to weaponize a lifetime of parental guilt to extract $500,000 from the daughter they had spent 30 years discarding. You owe us this! Howard suddenly yelled, a brief flash of his old anger piercing through the panic. We paid for your braces. We put food on your table. You cannot just sit up here in your ivory tower and watch your own mother and father get thrown out onto the street. If you do not wire the funds to the bank, we will be homeless, Clara. We will have absolutely nothing. How could you live with yourself knowing your parents are sleeping in a shelter while you sit on a mountain of cash? It was the exact same emotional blackmail they had used to force me to give up my childhood bedroom for Monica. It was the exact same guilt trip they used to demand I attend family dinners, just to be belittled. For my entire life, that specific tone of voice had paralyzed me. But sitting in my corner office looking at the two people who had gleefully funded a con artist, instead of believing my warnings, I felt absolutely nothing. The familial obligation they were trying to invoke had been dead for years. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the polished wood of my desk. The silence stretched until the tension in the room was almost unbearable. I am not paying off your debt, I stated, my voice echoing with absolute finality. The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Howard stared at me, his mouth opening and closing as his brain completely failed to process the rejection. He had been so certain that his parental authority combined with an aggressive guilt trip would automatically override my financial autonomy. For 33 years, he had operated under the delusion that I existed solely to serve the family ecosystem. Beverly let out a high-pitched wail, her hands clawing uselessly at the expensive fabric of her skirt. How can you be so cruel? She demanded, her voice breaking into a hysterical sob. We are your family, Clara. You have $1 million. You are just going to let us die in the streets out of spite. I stood up from my ergonomic leather chair and walked around the massive mahogany desk. I stopped when I was standing directly above them. They looked incredibly small, cowering on the imported carpet. You need to learn independence at some point, I said smoothly. Howard flinched as if I had physically struck him across the face. The recognition of his own words flashed instantly in his bloodshot eyes. It was the exact phrase he had used 10 years ago when he demanded I take out predatory loans to pay my own college tuition right before he purchased Monica a brand new luxury sedan in cash. I turned my gaze downward to my mother. And I will not enable your bad financial choices, I added softly. Beverly physically recoiled. She remembered those words perfectly. They were the precise words she had delivered with a condescending sneer when I asked for a temporary $500 loan to cover rent during my first unpaid internship. She had denied my request on a Tuesday, and on Thursday she had handed Andre $20,000 for a fake European business retreat. You are throwing our own advice back in our faces while we are losing our home? Howard choked out his face, turning a blotchy red. This is sick, Clara. This is a sick, vindictive game. It is not a game, I corrected him, my voice entirely devoid of sympathy. It is a boundary. You made a series of catastrophic, irreversible decisions. You explicitly chose to leverage your primary residence. You explicitly chose to ignore every obvious red flag. You explicitly chose to publicly disown me in a crowded restaurant to protect the fragile ego of a convicted felon. Those choices have brutal consequences. I took a deliberate step backward, increasing the physical distance between us. I am not your safety net, I continued. I am not your emergency fund. I will not hand over a single cent of my hard-earned money to bail you out of a disaster you actively and aggressively engineered. My bank account is permanently closed to this family. Howard grabbed the polished leg of my desk, his knuckles turning white. Clara, please, he begged, abandoning all remaining pride. The bank is going to take everything we have built. Where are we supposed to go? That is a logistical problem you need to solve independently, I replied coldly. You have exactly 14 days to pack up your remaining possessions and vacate the premises before the sheriff arrives. I highly suggest you start looking for affordable rental apartments in a much cheaper zip code. I walked back around my desk, sat down, and pressed the flashing silver intercom button. Sarah, I said, clearly keeping my eyes locked on my terrified parents. Please, send the security team into my office immediately. My guests have overstayed their welcome, and they are finally leaving. Word count, do not use any titles. Use an engaging and concise writing style and avoid rambling. Make the structure clear so it can be easily connected to other parts. Remember to remove meaningless three-dot pauses because I use an AI voice. Section 19, 500 words. The ultimate twist in real estate law. Clara reveals that she didn't just walk away, using a blind trust. Clara's wealth management team purchased the bank's bad debt at auction. Clara is now the legal owner of her parents' foreclosed house. She slides the formal eviction notice across the desk to her stunned parents. Welcome to the real world. You have 30 days to vacate my property. The intercom clicked off. Howard and Beverly remained frozen on the floor, their faces pale masks of absolute horror as the reality of my words finally penetrated their entitlement. They began to scramble to their feet, their movements jerky and uncoordinated, terrified of being physically dragged through the pristine corporate lobby by armed guards. But I had one final piece of business to conclude before they were escorted out of my life permanently. Wait! I commanded sharply, my voice cutting through their panicked shuffling. They both stopped instantly. A tiny, pathetic glimmer of hope flared in my mother's eyes. Beverly actually thought I had changed my mind. She thought the maternal tears had finally broken through my defenses and that I was about to write the check. I opened the top drawer of my desk and retrieved a single heavy sheet of legal paper. It was embossed with the official seal of a prominent commercial real estate holding firm. I did not toss this document. I laid it gently on the edge of the mahogany desk, making sure the bold black text printed at the very top was perfectly legible. When I told you the bank registered your default this morning, I was telling the exact truth. I explained, my tone conversational and utterly terrifying. However, I omitted one minor technical detail regarding how Vanguard handles the secondary debt market. Vanguard Financial does not hold bad residential debt. We liquidate those liabilities immediately to maintain our quarterly profit margins. Howard frowned, wiping his tear-stained face with the back of his hand. What are you talking about? He stammered, entirely confused by the sudden shift to corporate financial strategy. I am talking about leverage, Howard, I replied smoothly. When your predatory equity line defaulted at midnight, the bank instantly auctioned the bad debt portfolio to the highest bidder in a closed commercial exchange. And because I am an apex senior director with an incredibly efficient wealth management team, I knew the precise second that auction would take place. I tapped my manicured fingernail against the heavy legal paper. I used a blind trust to execute the purchase anonymously. I continued watching the blood drain completely from my father's face as his brain finally caught up to my words. I bought the entire debt package using a fraction of my signing bonus. The bank got their financial write-off, and my trust received the physical collateral. Beverly started shaking her head frantically. No, she whispered, backing away from the desk as if the document were radioactive. No, you could not have done that. I own the debt, I stated, my voice echoing with absolute unbreakable authority. And because you are officially in default, I now legally own the physical collateral securing that debt. I did not just let you lose the Fairfield house. I bought it directly out from under you. I slid the document the rest of the way across the desk until it tipped over the edge and fell to the floor, landing face up right between Howard's expensive leather shoes. It was a formal notarized eviction notice. I am the legal owner of the property, I said, looking down at the people who had casually given away my childhood bedroom to accommodate their golden child. And I do not want you living in my house. Welcome to the real world. You have 30 days to vacate my property. The heavy oak doors swung open, and two massive security guards stepped into the office, their expressions entirely blank. Please escort these former homeowners off the premises. I instructed the guards, turning my chair away from my parents to stare out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling city below, and ensure they never set foot in this building again. The heavy oak doors swung shut, sealing the executive suite and severing my ties to the past forever. I did not turn around to watch them being marched out through the glass walls of the corporate lobby. I just kept my eyes fixed on the sprawling, glittering skyline of the city, feeling a profound, undeniable sense of absolute peace. 3 months later, that same sense of peace settled over me as I stood on the sprawling terrace of my new downtown penthouse. The sun was setting over the city, casting a brilliant array of orange and gold across the skyscrapers. The ambient noise of the metropolis below felt like a quiet, victorious symphony. I took a sip of my reserve wine, relishing the silence of a home that was entirely, unequivocally mine. The fallout from that afternoon in my office had been swift and merciless. Andre did not make it very far. Federal agents apprehended him at an international departure terminal attempting to board a flight to a non-extradition territory. The financial ledger I provided to the authorities was so comprehensively damning that the federal prosecutor did not even offer a plea deal. Andre was formally indicted on multiple counts of federal wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. He traded his tailored Italian suits for a standard-issue prison jumpsuit, and his brilliant tech startup dissolved into a mountain of state evidence. Monica, stripped of her stolen wealth, and her fraudulent husband was slammed violently into reality. The luxury sedans and the Upper East Side apartments vanished instantly. With no actual skills, no work history, and her reputation completely destroyed within our social circles, she was forced to take a minimum wage job as a retail associate at a dying suburban mall. The woman who once mocked my entry-level corporate positions now spent her days folding discounted sweaters for ungrateful customers, earning just enough to pay for a tiny, depressing studio apartment on the wrong side of town. As for my parents, they learned the brutal truth of the real estate market. On exactly the 30th day, a county sheriff oversaw their physical eviction from the Fairfield house. The massive, beautiful home they had weaponized against me was now officially part of my diversified investment portfolio. Howard and Beverly, entirely bankrupt and drowning in legal fees, relocated to a cramped, poorly ventilated one-bedroom rental on the outskirts of the city. Their social standing evaporated. Their country club memberships were revoked. They were left with absolutely nothing but the crushing realization that they had sacrificed their only loyal daughter for a fleeting illusion. I stepped back inside my penthouse, the cool air conditioning washing over me. I walked over to the massive mahogany desk in my home office, running my hand along the polished surface. For my entire life, I had been conditioned to believe that family was an unbreakable contract. I was taught that blood entitled people to your endless sacrifice, your constant forgiveness, and your hard-earned success. But standing in a sanctuary I bought with my own brilliance, I realized the ultimate truth. Blood does not entitle anyone to your hard work. Respect is earned, loyalty is reciprocated, and boundaries are absolute. I had completely dismantled the toxic ecosystem that tried to bury me, and from the ashes of their greed, I built an empire. I was no longer the discarded daughter. I was the architect of my own destiny, and my future was completely limitless.